This episode is sponsored by me and Learn Light and Sound, where we have courses teaching you how to make better sound and lighting for your videos. Link down below. All right, we are now here in DaVinci Resolve Studio 20, specifically over on the Fairlight tab. And I have two different tracks here. These were recorded at the same time with two different microphones, a lavalier microphone, the Sanken COS-11D, and a boom microphone, the Sennheiser MKH50. They sound a little different, and so if I were to cut between them, say for example on one particular take, it sounded, I don't know, maybe the lavalier microphone got bumped and I want to switch over to the boom mic or something else like that happened, we need the two of them to sound very similar so it's not obvious to the audience that we are cutting back and forth between the two mics. Here's how they sound. I'll start with the lavalier mic. It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. Okay, definitely sounding a bit different there. So the boom microphone sounds more open to me. The lavalier microphone sounds like it's attached to somebody's body and sounds a little stuffier because it is attached to somebody's body. So to match the two of them, I'm going to come down here to the boom microphone track and right-click, choose Clip Operations, EQ Matcher, and we're going to capture the EQ profile. Next, we'll come back up to the lavalier microphone clip, right-click, Clip Operations, EQ Matcher, and Apply to Clip EQ. Or we could also apply it to the track EQ. Let's actually do that. And now we can actually come and look and see what it did here in the EQ for this particular track. So to make the lavalier microphone sound more like the boom microphone, it applied this EQ on the track that the lavalier microphone is sitting on. So it boosted a little here in the low frequencies below 100 or right around 100 hertz. Another boost between 250 and 500, a cut just after 500. Another boost, tiny boost at 2K, and a little boost here. None of these are extreme, like we're talking about. Well, this is probably the most extreme, these two. Plus 3 dB, minus 4 dB. Let's see how they sound now. We'll start again with the lavalier mic. It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. Okay, it helps some. Not bad. I'd like to see it get a little more aggressive. Let's give you an example of what it would be like if it were more aggressive. Here, I have the exact same thing set up, except in this case, instead of using the EQ match within Fairlight, I actually used a different plugin called Pro Q4. And specifically, this is the EQ change that it made to the lavalier microphone so that it would match more closely to the boom microphone. And it's doing much more extreme moves here. For example, adding 7 dB right here, subtracting 6 dB there, boosting about 3 here, a little under 2 here, and doing this massive boost in the low frequencies on a huge shelf of plus almost 14 dB. So let's see how this one sounds. I'll start again with the lavalier microphone and then cut over to the boom microphone. It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. That did a much better job of matching the two. So I expect that DaVinci Resolve will get better at this over time, and I think the way to do that would be for them to essentially make the EQ match more aggressive, like Pro Q4 is doing here. So hopefully that's helpful for you. Get out there and make some great sound, and we'll talk to you again next week.